Hey there, Drowsy Historian here. Tonight you're deep in the mud-soaked front lines of World War I, a narrow world of tin cups, stubborn fires, and weary soldiers waiting for something warm. You're not a general or a hero, just a trench cook drifting through a weary regiment. Before we start, do me one small favour. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there. If you prefer these stories without ads, you can join the Patreon. It's linked in the description. And if you want the ultimate immersive experience, consider using a pair of wireless earbuds. They're comfortable, discreet and designed, so you can wear them even while sleeping. I've linked my favourite pair, plus other sleep tools, in the description. Now, lie back, get comfortable, let's begin. You wake to a pale, unenthusiastic sunrise sliding over the trench, the light settling on everything with the same reluctant energy you feel in your bones. It is not the kind of sunrise that inspires poets or generals. It is a sunrise meant for people who already expect disappointment and therefore take comfort in its consistency. The mud around you glows faintly, almost proudly, as though pleased to show off its latest collection of footprints, tin can impressions, and whatever else sank into it during the night. You push yourself upright, feeling the familiar weight of damp fabric tugging at your shoulders, the coat that never really dries, no matter how many times you hang it near a fire. The air carries a faint chill, not enough to be alarming, but enough to remind you that today will be exactly like the others, slow, wet and unmistakably scented with cabbage. Somewhere nearby, a rat rustles through a torn sandbag, offering you a vacant glance before returning to its morning responsibilities. You have come to understand the rats well. They wake early, they patrol with purpose, and they judge your cooking with the calm confidence of seasoned restaurant critics. This one, you suspect, knows your entire menu by heart. You nod at it politely, in the way one acknowledges a co-worker to whom one is not especially close, but with whom one regularly shares the same workspace. The trench is quiet in this hour, when soldiers still hover somewhere between sleep and duty. You rise, brushing off the mud that has climbed onto your clothing during the night, and begin the slow shuffle toward your kitchen. Calling it a kitchen feels ambitious, but you use the term anyway, because it is the only word available that gives your situation a sense of structure. Without the word kitchen, you are simply a person standing beside a few pots, a dented ladle, and a fire that refuses to behave. You step over a rotting plank that threatens to collapse under the weight of your foot, but mercifully chooses not to. Beneath it, the mud stirs with the sluggish confidence of something that knows no one will ever defeat it. It has lasted longer than many armies, longer than several of the tools in your hands, and possibly longer than some of the vegetables you are expected to cook today. Your kitchen sits in a shallow recess of the trench, a space carved out not by design, but by accident. Someone dropped a heavy crate there once, the ground gave up, and the hollow that remained was simply declared the cooking station. You have learned that much of trench life operates on this principle. If something falls over and stays there long enough, it becomes infrastructure. You kneel beside your stove, which is more of a philosophical concept than an appliance. It smokes when unprovoked, refuses to ignite when needed, and occasionally emits sounds that suggest it is reconsidering its purpose in life. You coax the embers gently, speaking to them in a tone that has, over time, grown increasingly similar to the way you speak to stubborn donkeys. Eventually, a small flame gathers the courage to appear. The first task of the day is always the same: boiling water. You've developed a deep respect for boiling water, not because it is difficult, but because it insists on existing between two extremes, either taking hours to heat or evaporating the instant you stop watching it. You lift a battered pot, its metal worn thin and decorated with dents you prefer not to question. You pour in water that arrived yesterday in a barrel sealed so poorly it might as well have travelled with a map showing exactly how to leak. While the pot settles on the flame, you breathe in the morning air, a mix of earth, smoke, and the faint promise of stew that will inevitably disappoint everyone. The sky above the trench is a dull sheet of pale colour, a soft and distant grey that politely avoids making any strong commitments about the weather. It could brighten, it could darken, it could deliver an unexpected shower. It prefers to keep you guessing. A soldier drags himself past your station, half awake, offering a sleepy nod. You respond with the same slow acknowledgement, the one reserved for those who understand that breakfast is not a meal here, but an act of endurance. He mutters something about the night shift, though his voice is so low you only catch the rhythm, not the words. It hardly matters. The trench is a place where people make statements into the air, simply to remind themselves they still exist. The rats return, one by one, as if summoned by some kitchen bell you cannot hear. They gather in a loose semicircle, which over time has become their preferred seating arrangement for observing your culinary efforts. You have begun to suspect they consider you part of their morning entertainment, a live demonstration of human persistence in the face of questionable ingredients. The pot begins to tremble faintly, and you lean in closer, careful not to disturb it. The last time you disturbed boiling water, the steam shot upward with such enthusiasm that the nearest soldier accused the pot of attempting sabotage. This morning, however, it behaves. The surface breaks softly, bubbles rising in a slow procession like polite guests arriving at a dreary social event. You prepare the ingredients for breakfast. Preserved meat of uncertain age, vegetables whose identity has been lost to history, and a handful of oats that cling together in a way that suggests emotional dependency. You chop them with a calm rhythm, the knife moving through each piece as though it has finally accepted the futility of resistance. The sound is steady, soothing even, and blends naturally with the soft bubbling of the pot. As you drop the ingredients into the water, a mild aroma wafts upward. It is not pleasant, but it is familiar, and in the trenches, familiarity is more comforting than flavour. You stir the mixture slowly, watching it swirl into a unified mass of nutrition that defies classification. The soup du jour is the same as the soup of every other jour, but you find comfort in its consistency. You suspect the soldiers do as well, though they will never admit it. Footsteps approach again as more men awaken, their expressions hovering somewhere between gratitude and resignation. They stand quietly, waiting with the patience of people who long ago realized that complaining does not make food appear any faster. You ladle portions into their mess tins one by one. They accept the servings with slow nods, each man inhaling the steam that rises from the tin, as though attempting to identify whether this batch is marginally better or slightly worse than the previous one. They rarely reach a conclusion. One soldier, after staring at his breakfast for a moment, remarks that it looks improved. You glance down at the pot, noticing nothing different about it. Perhaps the steam swirled more artistically this morning. Perhaps the oats arranged themselves in a way that could be considered decorative. Or perhaps the soldier, like you, has simply discovered that endurance occasionally produces small pockets of optimism. You continue serving until the crowd thins, the men wandering off to whatever tasks the morning demands. The trench grows quieter again, leaving you alone with your disappearing fire, your empty pot, and your dedicated audience of rats still watching you as though the next performance is about to begin. You sit back on a crate that has, over time, moulded itself to fit your shape. The sunrise has climbed a little higher, casting a soft glow across the trench walls. Everything looks slightly more defined now. The texture of the sandbags, the glistening edges of the mud, the threads of steam drifting upward from your cooking station. It is still bleak, still damp, still unmistakably the front line. Yet in this dim morning light, the world feels as though it is taking a quiet breath with you. You inhale slowly, letting the air settle inside your chest. Another day as the trench cook has begun, and the small rituals already feel familiar, almost comforting. The kitchen may be little more than a stubborn fire and a pot that dreams of retirement, but it is your domain. Here in this narrow stretch of mud and smoke, you provide warmth in the only form available, food that tastes like survival. And as the dawn completes its reluctant rise, you feel yourself lean naturally into the rhythm of the day, ready to continue the quiet, absurd, and strangely peaceful work that waits just a few steps ahead. The morning settles into its slow rhythm as the soldiers drift away, leaving behind the faint aroma of steam and the soft echo of tin cups tapping against their belts. You sit a moment longer, letting the warmth of the embers brush against your hands before rising to inspect the space that insists on calling itself a kitchen. It greets you with the same silent indifference as always, a small patch of earth beaten into shape by necessity rather than design. You step toward it, boots sinking just slightly with every movement, as though the mud is trying to remind you that it has opinions about how things should be done. It stretches out in every direction, thick and persistent, clinging to the trench walls, your boots, and the pots you scrubbed only yesterday. You know that if someone were to measure the composition of this mud, it would likely reveal a higher percentage of cookware than soil. The pots sit in a weary cluster near the fire pit, each one bearing the marks of long service, dents deep enough to hold water, scratches that resemble ancient runes, and a general air of resignation. They are battered, but they continue to hold food more or less upright, which qualifies them as reliable by trench standards. You pick one up, feeling the cold metal beneath your fingers. It gazes back at you with a sort of quiet judgment, as though assessing the choices that led you both here. You turn it in your hands, watching the light strike its uneven surface. In another world, perhaps this pot once belonged to someone who cared deeply about seasoning, presentation, or flavour. Here, its only concern is structural survival. You set it down carefully, out of respect for the shared hardship, and move on to the others. They form a mismatched family, some tall, some squat, some inexplicably oval, each offering its flaws openly, without the slightest attempt at pretense. The mud beneath your feet shifts, creating the faint sound of suction, as though trying to reclaim the pot you just rescued. You step back slowly, with the cautious grace of someone negotiating with an unpredictable colleague. The mud, offended or uninterested, releases you. The fire pit sits nearby, its stones arranged in a lopsided circle that suggests the person who built it was interrupted repeatedly or simply surrendered at some point. You crouch beside it, brushing away ashes that drift upward in lazy spirals. The wood inside is damp again, which is not surprising. Everything here is damp. Even things that logically should not be capable of absorbing moisture seem to glisten with it. You suspect that if you left a soap bar outside long enough, it would eventually sprout moss. You try coaxing a flame from the wood, striking a match whose spark flares with brief enthusiasm before settling into the soft glow of inevitability. Smoke curls upward, winding around your face with a polite cough, like a house guest trying to get your attention without causing offence. You wave it away gently, feeling the warmth grow just enough to convince the fire that living is still worth the effort. The kitchen itself occupies a corner of the trench, where the walls bow inward, creating a sort of natural alcove. The boards that line it have swollen with moisture and war stress, bending themselves into shapes that suggest they would like to retire, but are too polite to mention it. You've grown accustomed to their creaks, groans, and occasional splinters, each sound part of the daily litany that defines your workspace. You reach for your tools, a ladle shaped suspiciously like a flattened spoon, a stirring stick that once belonged to a broom, and a knife whose blade leans ever so slightly to one side as if contemplating a new career path. You arrange them in a row, taking comfort in their familiar imperfections. Their flaws are stable, dependable. You know exactly how each one will behave, unlike the fire, the weather, or the supply deliveries. The mud continues its commentary as you move, offering soft squelches that form a rhythm beneath your actions. You listen to it with the same patience you give everything here. The mud cannot help itself. It has a personality, after all, developed through years of swallowing boots, tins, and hopes with equal enthusiasm. You accept its presence as one accepts the eccentricities of an elderly relative. Quietly, without complaint. You glance up as a breeze rolls down the trench, carrying the muted scent of damp earth and distant smoke. It brushes against your face and moves onward, stirring the edges of your coat as it goes. The trench walls seem to shift gently with the wind, their stacked sandbags settling into new positions that don't look any more stable than before, but somehow feel more familiar. You step deeper into your cooking space, examining the makeshift shelf someone built last month from old ammunition crates. The shelf leans forward as if peering down at what you're doing, possibly judging your organization, possibly considering collapsing onto you just to see how you'd react. On it rest containers of ingredients, tins with faded labels, jars whose contents have merged into indistinguishable shades, and sacks of grain that rustle faintly when touched, as though remembering drier climates. You lift a tin experimentally. Its surface is slick, a thin layer of mud clinging to it as though unwilling to let go. You wipe it with a cloth that was once white, but now carries the history of every meal you have ever cooked. The label still clings to the tin in scattered patches, giving clues to what might be inside, but never enough certainty. You place it on the table you've pieced together out of planks, salvaged during quieter hours. The table groans under the weight, not because the tin is heavy, but because the table is sensitive. Your hands move steadily, almost rhythmically, as you prepare the area for the next round of cooking. Each movement feels like a continuation of a task that began long before you arrived, as if generations of trench cooks have shaped these motions over time. There is an ease to it, a familiarity that doesn't lessen the absurdity, but softens its edges. A small cascade of dirt falls from the trench wall, landing near your pot with the soft thud of something surrendering to gravity. You look up automatically, searching for the cause, but see only the usual shifting of earth and sandbags. An ongoing reminder that the trench is always rearranging itself. You pick up the dirt absent-mindedly, tossing it away from the cooking area in a gesture that has become instinctive, as though protecting the kitchen from nature's attempts to redecorate. You test the fire again, noting the way it flickers unevenly, flames tilting like dancers unsure of their choreography. Still, it burns, and that is enough. You adjust the wood carefully, nudging it into cooperation, and listen to the quiet crackle that follows. The sound blends into the wider symphony of the trench, the distant footsteps, the low murmur of soldiers speaking softly, the rumble of something far away that might be thunder or might be something else entirely. You have learned not to question these sounds. They weave through the air with the same calm persistence as your own work. A rat appears again, possibly the same one from earlier, or perhaps one of its many relatives. It stops a few feet away, sitting back on its haunches as though prepared to offer a formal review of your workspace, its whiskers twitch, its eyes glinting with cynical intelligence. You nod at it without breaking focus. If the rat disapproves, it will show you eventually. If it approves, you will never know. This seems like a fair agreement. You take another step and the mud clings to your boot with such determination that it feels personal. You lift your foot slowly, releasing it with a sound that resembles a sigh. The mud, apparently satisfied, shifts back into place as though erasing the evidence of your movement. The ground here has a way of smoothing over everything, swallowing footprints and intentions alike. Your gaze travels over the entire kitchen area, taking in the mismatched collection of tools, pots, crates, and scorched surfaces. None of it looks like a proper cooking space. And yet, in its own stubborn way, it functions, it endures. You endure with it. Together, you manage to create meals from ingredients that seem surprised to be eaten at all. You kneel beside the fire, letting the warmth touch your hands again. There is comfort in the small glow, a reminder that even in a place built from mud and uncertainty, heat still rises, food still simmers, and work continues in quiet, steady rhythms. You breathe in slowly, listening to the soft crackle, the gentle shift of air, the familiar sounds of a kitchen that refuses to give up. In the calm that settles over this corner of the trench, you feel yourself move deeper into the day's tasks, guided not by haste, but by the slow, enduring patience the trenches demand. The kitchen waits, imperfect but loyal, ready to serve as the strange, mud-soaked heart of your morning. The fire settles into a steady glow, the flames leaning toward the pot, as if curious about what you will place inside it next. The warmth brushes your hands gently, carrying the faint scent of smoke mixed with something you hope is wood, and not, as occasionally happens, the lingering soul of a crate that once transported boots. The trench seems calmer now, the early hour stretching itself awake with slow, reluctant movements. This is the moment when breakfast begins to take shape, though shape may be an ambitious term for what you create here. You reach for the ingredients arranged on the slanted table, each item waiting with a sort of weary acceptance. The preserved meat, wrapped in its tin prison, makes a soft metallic sigh when you open it, as though relieved to finally escape. The contents settle into the pot with a muted plop, and you stir them gently, watching textures blend into each other until everything looks uniformly uncertain. In this kitchen, raw and cooked share more similarities than differences. You have learned not to question this. The trench has its own culinary logic. If something doesn't look edible, it will eventually, simply through persistence. The oats come next, clumping together in a single-minded effort to form one large, inseparable mass. You break them apart with the spoon, which offers a small protest with every stir. The mixture thickens into a slow-moving swirl, bubbling occasionally in a way that suggests it would like to speak but lacks the vocabulary. The fire crackles softly beneath the pot, a gentle chorus that accompanies your movements. As you mix the ingredients, the air fills with steam, warm, heavy, and carrying the faintest hint of something nourishing. You breathe it in without expecting much. Nutrition here is more of a gesture, a polite nod towards survival rather than a firm handshake. Still, it is enough. It has to be. The trench demands endurance, and endurance rarely concerns itself with flavour. You continue stirring, tracing slow circles around the edge of the pot. Each rotation feels deliberate, steady, as though carving out a small rhythm in a place where time behaves strangely. Everything in the trench seems both rushed and suspended, tasks happening quickly, yet taking forever. The food reflects this inconsistency flawlessly. It cooks fast when you're not watching and refuses to simmer when you need it most. You have adjusted to this unpredictable cooperation, understanding that the pot has moods just like the weather, the fire, and the men who will soon gather for their morning meal. A soft shuffle of boots approaches from down the trench. One soldier emerges, his expression hovering somewhere between exhaustion and mild curiosity. He glances at the pot, then at you, as though gauging whether either of you holds any secrets worth knowing. He does not speak, simply leans against a sandbag with a quiet sigh. You recognize the posture. It is the stance of someone who has accepted that breakfast will not surprise him, and that this acceptance is its own form of comfort. You ladle a small portion into a tin cup to test the consistency. It drips slowly, reluctantly, as though questioning why gravity applies to it specifically. You examine the mixture, then nod in quiet approval. If it moves at all, it is ready. That is the closest thing to a rule the trench has taught you. The soldier watches with half-lidded eyes, his breath forming small clouds in the cool morning air. You offer him a spoonful, and he tastes it with the concentration of a scholar deciphering ancient texts. His expression remains unchanged, which is the highest compliment he can reasonably give. You return to stirring, encouraged by this neutral endorsement. More men begin to appear, drifting toward the kitchen in slow, uneven lines. They move as though guided by instinct, like birds migrating out of habit rather than enthusiasm. Their uniforms hang differently on each of them. shaped by nights spent in damp dugouts and days spent carrying burdens that cannot be catalogued. Some rub their eyes, others stretch their arms, and all of them wear the same expression, the look of people who expect little but appreciate anything warm. They gather around the pot, forming a loose semicircle that mirrors the rats from earlier. Their silence is companionable, marked only by the soft scrape of boots shifting in mud and the occasional cough. You ladle portions into their tins one by one, watching as steam curls upward, fogging the air around their faces. They hold their cups carefully, almost reverently, as though aware of how many steps it took for this simple meal to exist. One soldier murmurs a quiet thank you, his voice roughened by cold air and lack of sleep. You nod in return, the gesture becoming part of the morning ritual. Another takes a deep breath over his tin, savouring the warmth more than the scent. A third examines a particularly ambiguous piece of vegetable floating near the surface, then shrugs and eats it anyway. There is no point questioning the mysteries contained in trench food. They are simply part of the experience. As each man receives his portion, the tension in their shoulders softens. The meal may not be delicious, but it is something predictable. Predictability is a rare commodity here, more valuable than spices or fancy ingredients. In a place shaped by uncertainty, a bowl of warm, bland stew becomes an anchor. You return to the pot, stirring slowly to keep the mixture from settling into a solid block at the bottom. The spoon drags through the thickened contents, creating soft grooves that fill themselves almost immediately. The repetition is soothing, a small movement that reassures you the world is still functioning in some capacity. The fire pops gently beneath the pot, embers shifting as though adjusting themselves to watch the proceedings. A brief gust of wind slips down the trench, carrying with it a chill that brushes across your cheeks. It passes through the gathered soldiers as well, prompting a few shivers. But the warmth from the tins counters it, rising in soft clouds that drift upward into the grey sky. You watch the steam blend with the morning air, the two becoming indistinguishable as they rise. When the first wave of soldiers disperses, others arrive to take their place. The cycle continues in quiet succession. Ladle, tin, nod, steam, silence. Each motion merges into the next, forming a rhythm that feels almost musical. The trench listens, absorbing these small morning sounds into its vast, muted landscape. You remain steady throughout, moving between pot and soldiers, with a calm that surprises even you. Somewhere beneath the mud, beneath the cold air and the smoke, lies the simple truth that feeding people matters. It does not need to taste wonderful. It does not need to inspire poetry. It only needs to be here, warm and waiting for the next tired pair of hands. When the last of the men wanders off, holding his breakfast as though guarding a flickering flame, the trench grows quiet again. You place the ladle on the table, letting it rest against the uneven wood. The pot simmers softly, content to relax now that its purpose has been fulfilled. You breathe deeply, absorbing the stillness that settles over your small kitchen. The fire crackles in gratitude, the mud gurgles its usual commentary, the steam fades, and in this gentle lull, you prepare yourself for whatever the day's next task will ask of you, moving naturally with the slow, steady rhythm that the trench has taught you so well. When the last soldier drifts away with his tin of breakfast, a hush settles over your little corner of the trench. The pot simmers softly, as if unwilling to accept that its moment of necessity has passed, and the fire sighs in a long ember-filled exhale. You lean back slightly, letting your shoulders loosen, and feel the dampness of the air settle around you like a familiar shawl. This calm hour is when your other audience arrives, the ones who never ask for food, but review it with unwavering scrutiny. A pair of small eyes appears first from a gap between two sandbags. Then another, and another. The rats treat your kitchen like an exclusive dining club, only without the inconvenience of reservations or manners. They emerge with the quiet confidence of regulars, whiskers twitching, paws tapping lightly on the boards as they approach. Their movements carry a peculiar dignity, as though each one has spent years observing the rise and fall of human civilizations from the vantage point of a trench wall. One bold rat scurries to the edge of a crate and sits up straight, its posture remarkably similar to that of a soldier about to make a formal request. Its nose quivers with the faint scent of leftover stew, and its beady eyes lock onto yours with unsettling familiarity. You nod at it out of habit. Respect in the trenches is a currency best shared widely. The rat acknowledges your gesture by grooming its face with rapid, deliberate movements, as if preparing itself for a very serious meeting. Meanwhile, two more climb atop the warped wooden table, an act they perform with such regularity that the table's surface bears tiny claw marks, like signatures. They examine the ladle, sniffing around its curved edges with the kind of professional curiosity normally reserved for museum curators. You watch them with an expression you've perfected over time, a calm acceptance tinged with the faintest hint of resignation. After all, these animals have been part of your daily routine for so long that their presence no longer feels intrusive. Instead, it feels like an extension of trench life, another thread in the tapestry of dampness, smoke, and quiet persistence. The fire crackles suddenly, causing one rat to jump sideways in surprise. It lands in the mud with a small splash, then freezes for a moment, its tail curled upward in annoyance. You resist the urge to laugh, not out of politeness, but because laughter seems like a luxury incompatible with the early morning chill. Instead, you offer the rat a brief incline of your head, as if apologizing for the fire's unpredictability. The rat accepts this apology by shaking mud from its paws and continuing its inspection. More of them appear now, forming a loose semicircle around your kitchen space. They sit back collectively on their haunches, chests puffed out slightly, as though ready to issue feedback on your culinary techniques. Their expressions convey the same quiet skepticism you see in the soldiers just before they take the first bite of a new dish. You stir the pot gently, letting the remnants of breakfast swirl into a soft haze. The steam drifts upward, and the rats follow the movement with synchronized precision. They seem to understand the significance of steam, perhaps interpreting it as a curtain rising on the next act of their morning entertainment. You've begun to suspect they critique not just flavor, but your form, your stirring technique, your posture, your ladle grip. A smaller rat inches closer, its fur a mottled grey that blends seamlessly with the trench walls. It approaches the table leg, pauses, and taps it twice with its paw. This appears to be part of its ritual, an inspection of structural integrity, performed daily with unwavering commitment. You appreciate its consistency. In a world where sandbags shift, boards warp, and fires wander between life and death, the steady routines of these creatures offer a strange sense of stability. You reach for a cloth to wipe your hands, and the rats' heads turn in unison, their ears perking as though you've announced something of great importance. They watch you with a seriousness that borders on melodrama. You wonder what stories they pass among themselves when you aren't listening. Tales of cooks long gone, perhaps, or legends of particularly generous spills. The quiet stretches comfortably between you and your onlookers. The trench around you hums with distant sounds, boots on wooden planks, the faint clatter of gear being adjusted, the soft murmurs of men preparing for the day. Yet here, in your little enclave, the rats maintain their attentive silence, broken only by the occasional squeak or the soft rustle of paws moving through the mud. One of them climbs onto the crate you sit upon, its tiny claws gripping the wood. It pauses beside you, looking up with a familiarity that would be unsettling in any other context. You offer it a calm glance, and it seems satisfied, turning its attention instead to the pot. It stretches forward, sniffing lightly, then retreats with the dignified air of a food critic acknowledging a dish's existence before passing judgment. You shift your weight slightly, listening to the mud squish beneath your boots. The rats shift with you, as though adjusting their seating arrangement to maintain optimal viewing angles. Their presence is oddly comforting, a reminder that even in a place shaped by hardship, There are beings who expect nothing from you except consistency, and perhaps the occasional dropped crumb. A breeze slips down into the trench again, stirring the edges of your coat and causing the sandbags to shed a thin layer of dust. The rats blink at the disturbance, but remain steadfast. Their patience is admirable, rivaling even that of the soldiers who queue for meals before dawn. You wonder, not for the first time, if rats become more philosophical in wartime. They seem to contemplate everything with a quiet depth, as though pondering the mysteries of your recipes or the futility of trying to remain clean. You lower the ladle into the pot once more, even though breakfast is long finished. The motion feels necessary now, part of the unspoken agreement between you and your silent critics. They lean forward collectively, watching each movement with intense concentration. The gentle swirl of broth seems to hold their attention, as if promising revelations that never arrive. A larger rat, one you recognize by a distinct notch in its ear, approaches the pot cautiously. It stops just short of the steam, sniffing the air with deliberate precision. This one has always carried itself with an air of authority, perhaps a leader among the trench's rodent population. It studies you for a moment, its dark eyes reflecting the flicker of the fire. You nod at it again, a gesture of mutual respect between working professionals. Eventually, the rats grow restless, sensing that the entertainment portion of the morning has concluded. One by one, they retreat into the shadows, through gaps in the sandbags, under planks, into small holes that seem to lead nowhere and everywhere at once. Their departure is unceremonious, yet it leaves behind an odd sense of emptiness, as though a familiar audience has departed after a long performance. You stand quietly, letting the stillness reclaim the kitchen. The pot cools, the fire settles into a subdued glow, and the faint impressions of tiny paws remain in the mud like signatures on a contract. You breathe in the quiet, letting it fill the space the rats have left behind. In this rare pause, with the trench holding its breath around you, the day stretches onward, waiting for your next move. You wipe your hands once more, feeling the cloth's dampness, and listen to the shifting earth, the murmurs of distant voices, and the lingering echo of tiny footsteps fading into the walls. And as you stand there, the kitchen at rest and the mud settling beneath you, you prepare yourself to continue the slow work of feeding a world that never stops asking, even in its quietest moments. The trench settles into a quiet murmur once the rats disappear, leaving behind only the drifting smoke from the cooling fire and the faint warmth still clinging to your sleeves. You stand for a moment, letting the air gather around you, its dampness soft but insistent. Eventually, the pot cools enough to be set aside, and the last traces of steam fade into the grey sky overhead. The kitchen, for now, has given you everything it can. You step away from the stove and begin heading down the trench, boots sinking slightly into the mud with each stride. The boards beneath your feet shift in subtle waves, creaking their warnings, but you've grown accustomed to their unpredictable moods. You follow the narrow walkway, a path worn by countless footsteps, though the mud seems determined to erase evidence of all of them. A faint, earthy smell drifts in the air, a combination of wet soil, damp fabric, and something metallic that never fully disappears. It clings to your coat as you walk. The trench widens and narrows as if breathing, the sandbags leaning inward like silent observers. Every so often, a soldier passes with a nod, his eyes shadowed, his thoughts somewhere far beyond the walls of this narrow world. You return the nods instinctively, sharing the small acknowledgement that morning has begun its slow march toward whatever comes next. Your path leads toward the supply dump, a section of the trench where objects gather not out of purpose but out of circumstance. It exists in a half-organised, half-abandoned state, shaped by hurried deliveries and the natural tendency of boxes to collapse under pressure. The area announces itself long before you reach it, not by sound, but through an unmistakable fragrance. A mixture of burlap, rust, dried vegetables, and the kind of aging wood that seems to be contemplating its own future. As you step into the supply dump, the world around you shifts in tone. The space feels denser, cluttered with shadows and shapes that seem to blur at their edges. Crates lie stacked in uncertain towers, leaning against each other, the way tired workers do after long hours. Some boxes sit open, their contents staring upward with the vague expression of objects that expected to be used sooner. Others remain sealed, their lids bearing faded stencils in languages that look familiar but feel centuries old. You pause, taking in the peculiar atmosphere. The ingredients here always seem caught in a state somewhere between preserved and philosophically confused, as if they've accepted their fate, but still ponder what the original purpose of that fate might have been. You walk slowly along the rows of sacks and tins, brushing your fingertips lightly across their surfaces. Many of them feel older than the war itself, survivors of multiple conflicts, shipped from depot to depot until settling here as though this trench were a retirement home. A sack of potatoes slumps against a crate, its contents shifting with a soft thud. You lift the edge of the fabric and peek inside. The potatoes gaze back at you, each one shaped like it gave up resisting years ago. Their skins are tough, patched and uneven, bearing the marks of travel and storage. Some sprout tiny roots, reaching out cautiously as if testing whether the trench soil might welcome them. You let the sack fall closed, giving the potatoes the privacy they seem to desire. Next to them, a stack of tins rises in a precarious column. The metal is dented, the labels faded to the point where the illustrations resemble abstract art more than anything edible. You pick one up. It rattles faintly, but not in an alarming way. The sound suggests its contents are still present, merely rearranged. You turn the tin over, reading the remnants of a label that once proclaimed its contents proudly. Now the letters cling to the surface like weary travellers. You return the tin to its place, adjusting the stack slightly to prevent it from toppling over. A gentle breeze finds its way into the supply dump, stirring the edges of loose paper that rests on a crate nearby. The rustling sound feels strangely soothing, a whisper of something beyond mud and monotony. Moving further into the space, you discover a pile of onions, their outer layers peeling like fragile parchment. The smell rises faintly, sharp but softened by damp air. You pick one up and examine it, turning it in your palm. It feels firm enough, though its skin bears a few scars from its journey. You set it aside for later use, placing it on a crate that seems sturdy enough to hold it. You continue walking, your steps slow and deliberate. The ground here behaves differently, as though the mud has absorbed the personalities of all the items stored upon it. Each footprint you leave behind feels momentary. The mud erases it almost immediately, pulling itself back into a smooth, unbroken surface. You've come to appreciate this habit. It reduces the impression that time is moving too quickly. A lone burlap bag sits in a corner, leaning against the trench wall. You tug at the string holding it closed and peek inside. Dried peas stare up in silent contemplation, their tiny round shapes perfectly still. You scoop a handful and let them trickle through your fingers, listening to the soft patter as they fall back into the sack. They sound like small raindrops striking a window, gentle and distant. You tie the bag closed and set it near the onion, forming the beginnings of a mental list for your next meal. Across from you, a large wooden crate sits half buried in the earth, as though the mud attempted to claim it but became bored halfway through. You kneel beside it, brushing away clumps of dirt to reveal its lid. When you pry it open, the hinges groan in protest, their voices rusty and tired. Inside, you find a mixture of supplies, some familiar, some less so. A few tins of condensed milk rest beside jars of something that might be fruit or might be an experiment that escaped classification. You lift one jar carefully, inspecting its cloudy contents. The preserved substance inside moves sluggishly, like a creature waking from hibernation. You return it to the crate after deciding it deserves more thought than you're prepared to give it now. A small notebook lies partially buried beneath a loose flap of burlap. You pick it up, brushing dirt from the cover. The pages inside are stained but intact. Scrawled handwriting fills several pages. Lists of supplies, scribbled recipes, or possibly the beginnings of a diary. The ink is smudged in places, making it difficult to determine what the writer intended. You read a few lines, tracing the faded words. They speak of quantities, substitutions, and the occasional plea for better ingredients, all expressed with a tired humour you recognise instantly. You close the notebook gently, feeling a quiet connection to whoever held it before. You tuck the notebook into your pocket and continue your slow walk. The supply dump stretches deeper than it first appears, each corner revealing something unexpected. A pile of salt sits in a broken crate, the grains clumped together in heavy blocks. Nearby, a coil of rope lies tangled atop a sack, its fibres stiff with mud. You pass by them without touching, trusting that they will remain exactly as you found them. A rare form of reliability in the trench. The sky above the dump shifts slightly, the light filtering down in muted tones. You feel the damp air brush against your neck as you kneel beside another crate. This one contains carrots, though carrot feels more like a genre than a specific vegetable in this context. They vary in shape, size, and colour, each one bearing the hallmarks of prolonged storage. Some have become strangely flexible, bending when lifted. Others remain unnervingly rigid. You select a few that seem cooperative and set them beside the onion and peas. An odd comfort settles over you as you assemble the small pile of ingredients. The supply dump, with all its leaning stacks and forgotten objects, holds a kind of quiet wisdom. Everything here has endured storms, transportation, neglect, time, and still remains capable of becoming part of a meal. In its own way, the dump mirrors the trench itself. Worn, weary, but still functioning. You straighten up, feeling the subtle pull of muscles, tired from bending and lifting. As you gather the ingredients in your arms, the distant murmur of voices drifts down the trench, blending with the soft rustle of canvas and the occasional clink of tools. The day is waking slowly, stretching its limbs in preparation for whatever it plans to offer. You turn back toward the path that leads to your kitchen area. The mud greets you underfoot again, its soft, consuming embrace neither hostile nor welcoming, merely consistent. Each step carries you forward with the weight of the supplies, their uneven edges pressing faintly against your coat. The trench curves gently, guiding you back toward the warmth of the fire pit. And as you make your way out of the supply dump, the quiet shapes behind you settle into stillness once more, as though returning to contemplation until their next summons. The air ahead feels slightly warmer, carrying a faint trace of yesterday's smoke. You tighten your grip on the ingredients, letting the corridor of sandbags lead you toward the next task of the day, its rhythm already waiting for your hands. The path narrows as you return toward your cooking space, the ingredients resting awkwardly in your arms, each one shifting its weight as if trying to escape back to the supply dump. A small cascade of dirt trickles from a sandbag overhead, dusting your sleeve with a thin film of earth. The trench greets you with its usual quiet, an ever-present hum of existence woven into the mud, the boards, and the damp air that clings lightly to your skin. Your kitchen appears ahead, unchanged, yet somehow different each time you approach it, as though the trench has been subtly redesigning the layout while your back was turned. The fire still smoulders, a soft pulse of heat shimmering above the ash, waiting with a patience that borders on indifference. You set your newly gathered ingredients on the crate-turned table, their muted colours blending seamlessly into the earthy tones surrounding them. Before any real cooking can begin, the most essential ritual demands attention: boiling water. You take a moment to steady your breathing, because experience has taught you that boiling water in the trench is not a mere task. It is a negotiation, a performance, a test of resilience. You reach for the battered pot, its metal cool and dimpled beneath your fingers. and carry it to the water barrel nearby. The barrel leans slightly, as if it too has grown tired of its duties, but it yields enough liquid for your purpose. You pour the water into the pot. It settles with a muted slosh, the sound deep and flat, as though the water itself is contemplating its next form. You place the pot carefully onto the grate above the fire, feeling the warmth rise to greet it. The flames respond with a small flicker, adjusting themselves with an air of reluctant cooperation. You crouch beside the fire, nudging the wood until the flames gather strength. They creep along the edges, hesitant yet determined, licking the bottom of the pot with slow, deliberate gestures. Smoke drifts upward in lazy spirals, carrying with it the faint scent of wet wood and something sweet that you hope is the remains of last night's tea rather than a burning splinter of the table. As the pot settles into its role, you take a step back and observe the scene with quiet familiarity. The water lies still, perfectly calm, giving no indication that it has any interest in boiling. You know better than to expect progress within the first few minutes. Water in the trench requires time to consider its decisions. You have learned, over countless mornings, that the act of boiling here is less about heat and more about persuasion. A few soldiers begin to drift toward your cooking area, moving slowly, as though following a scent that promises warmth rather than flavour. Their faces hold that expression unique to the trench, the look of men who have just accepted that their day will not be easy, but are willing to let small comforts soften its edges. They gather loosely near your makeshift kitchen, keeping a respectful distance from the fire, yet leaning just close enough to appreciate its warmth. One of them rubs his hands together, letting out a soft exhale as the heat reaches his fingers. Another peers into the pot with the careful curiosity of someone who doesn't expect much, but is open to being pleasantly surprised. They know that boiling water alone might be the highlight of their day, a luxury of warmth and simplicity in a world that offers little of either. You give them a small nod, acknowledging their presence. They nod back, their eyes settling on the pot with the earnest hope usually reserved for letters from home. The water stares back at all of you, unbothered by this attention. A faint tremble ripples across the surface, so subtle you almost miss it. The soldiers lean forward slightly, the way people do when witnessing the first movements of a theatrical performance. The pot emits a soft ping as the metal expands with heat, like a distant bell trying to communicate through thick fog. You watch the tiny ripples spread outward, then vanish. The water returns to stillness. You know better than to celebrate. This is merely its opening gesture, a polite acknowledgement that it is aware of your intentions. The wind drifts along the trench, carrying with it a thread of cold air that wraps itself around your ankles. You adjust your coat, tucking the edges closer to your body. The soldiers do the same, shifting their weight from one foot to the other. The pot, unaffected by the weather's attempts to distract it, holds its silence. Minutes pass. The fire crackles, the flames reaching higher, coaxing heat into the metal. The pot's surface begins to quiver again, this time with a slightly more pronounced ripple. The soldiers react as though witnessing the early stages of a rare natural phenomenon. One raises his eyebrows in mild optimism. Another rubs his chin thoughtfully, as though analysing the water's performance. You crouch beside the pot and adjust the wood once more, feeding the fire with careful precision. The flames brighten, sending a thin glow across the walls of the trench. The steam begins to rise in the faintest wisps, drifting upward before dissolving into the cool air. The soldiers exchange quiet glances. Someone mutters something too soft to hear, but the tone suggests a mixture of approval and relief. A single bubble surfaces, small and quivering, like a timid creature testing the air. It pops soundlessly. Then another follows, and another. The soldiers lean in closer. Boiling has begun its slow, deliberate dance. You watch as the water shifts from calm resignation to gentle agitation. The bubbles forming with increasing confidence, The fire crackles with renewed energy, as if proud of its accomplishment. The pot trembles faintly, giving the impression that it too has grown excited about the event. The soldiers stand straighter now, absorbing the warmth radiating from the pot. One extends his hands toward the steam, letting it rise through his fingers. Another closes his eyes briefly, savouring the moment as though inhaling the memory of something long forgotten. There is something undeniably soothing about watching water boil in the trench. It represents transformation, however small. For the soldiers, it signals the imminent possibility of tea or broth, anything warm enough to remind them that the world once contained simple pleasures. For you, it is a quiet triumph over the damp air, the stubborn fire, and the reluctant physics of this muddy environment. The water begins to roll into a full boil, bubbles breaking energetically across the surface. Steam rises in generous curls, drifting upward like the slow unravelling of a dream. The soldiers watch in reverent silence, the kind of silence usually reserved for ceremonies. For a moment, the trench feels softer, the walls less oppressive, the mud less heavy beneath your boots. You dip your ladle into the boiling water, lifting it carefully. The steam warms your face, and the ladle glows faintly with heat. The soldiers track the movement eagerly, their expressions lighting with the small hope that they might soon receive something warm to drink. Even the fire seems to settle, content in its role as a quiet facilitator of comfort. You pour a small stream of the boiling water into a tin cup, testing its clarity. It shimmers briefly before settling, the surface gently swirling. It looks almost peaceful. The soldiers crowd a little closer, each one waiting patiently, though their eyes betray how much they crave the tiny warmth this moment offers. You return the ladle to the pot and allow the boiling to continue, letting the flames feed the ritual. The soldiers remain nearby, basking in the simplicity of the scene. They do not need words. The steam speaks for all of you, rising into the grey morning and carrying a soft reassurance with it. In the trenches, even the smallest acts require resilience. Even boiling water becomes a reminder that warmth, however fleeting, can still exist in a world built from mud and monotony. You stand quietly, watching the pot as it bubbles steadily, its rhythm mingling with the sounds of distant footsteps and the shifting boards beneath your boots. And as the fire glows brighter and the soldiers lift their cups in anticipation, you feel the day settle naturally into its next task, guided by the gentle promise of heat rising from the heart of your humble kitchen. The boil settles into a steady rhythm, the surface rolling with quiet confidence, as if it has finally accepted its purpose. The soldiers drift away with their steaming cups, leaving behind a trail of rising warmth that dissolves into the grey air. You watch them go, their silhouettes blending into the bends of the trench until they become part of its living structure, shadows moving within shadows. The pot sits before you, its duty temporarily fulfilled. You let it cool, then empty what remains and set it aside. The fire underneath crackles, stretching itself like a tired animal, preparing for another round of effort. You feed it a few more pieces of wood. The flames accept them slowly, curling around the edges with a lazy appetite. The morning seeps into early afternoon, the light above the trench turning thinner, as though filtered through layers of damp wool. The soldiers' footsteps grow heavier, the sounds echoing faintly along the walls. You feel the subtle shift in the air, the quiet signal that lunchtime is approaching. It arrives not with fanfare, but with the slow resignation of men who have learned to expect little and be grateful for anything. You gather the ingredients you collected earlier, each piece resting exactly where you left it. The onion sits atop the crate, still bearing droplets of moisture. The carrots seem slightly more cooperative than before, as though the time spent waiting has softened their resolve. The dried peas remain silent in their burlap bag. You begin preparing them with unhurried movements, peeling, slicing, stirring, each gesture part of a choreography developed over long days and longer nights. The knife moves through the onion, releasing a sharp scent that rises briefly before the damp air swallows it whole. You sweep the pieces into the pot, where they scatter like fragments of forgotten thoughts. The carrots follow, thudding softly against the metal. You measure out a handful of peas and drop them in, listening to the soft patter they make as they disappear below the surface. Water flows from the barrel again, its cold stream settling over the vegetables with a muted splash. You place the pot on the grate and coax the fire back into liveliness. The flames rise with slow determination, licking at the pot's underside as though reacquainting themselves with an old role. You stir the mixture gently, watching the ingredients settle into place, each one accepting the fate of becoming lunch. The air grows thicker with heat. Steam begins to lift from the pot in thin ribbons, tracing delicate patterns against the trench wall. You step back slightly, feeling the warmth gather around your face. The fire hums beneath the pot, a quiet and persistent sound that feels oddly reassuring. As the stew begins its slow transformation, the soldiers emerge once more. They do not arrive all at once. Instead, they appear in twos and threes, drifting along the trench as though guided by instinct. Their eyes are shadowed, their shoulders heavy. Some rub at their faces as they walk, trying to pull themselves fully into wakefulness. Others keep their gaze low, their steps steady, each one carrying the weight of nights spent soaking in cold air and scattered dreams. They gather around your kitchen space without forming a line, simply positioning themselves in a loose, drifting orbit. No one speaks at first. Their silence is not awkward, but familiar, the kind that develops between people who have long accepted each other's exhaustion. Their presence settles into the kitchen like a soft fog, filling the empty spaces without disturbing anything. You lift the lid from the pot and stir the contents with slow, deliberate circles. The vegetables have softened, their edges blurring into the thick broth. The steam rises more steadily now, carrying with it the promise of warmth rather than flavour. The soldiers inhale deeply, not out of anticipation, but out of habit. A warm meal is something the body remembers, even when the mind has forgotten why it matters. One soldier steps closer, holding out his mess tin with the subdued politeness of someone requesting a favour from a world that rarely agrees to anything. His hands shake slightly, whether from cold, fatigue, or both, you cannot tell. You fill his tin, and he nods once before stepping back, cradling the small portion as though it contains answers. Another approaches, followed by two more. They drift in like ghosts, politely requesting sustenance. You move with steady efficiency, ladling the stew into each tin with the calm resignation of someone who knows texture is a luxury too extravagant for this environment. The stew lands in their tins with a thick sound, settling like a weary traveller claiming a seat after a long journey. The soldiers accept their portions without complaint. Complaints require energy, and energy is a scarce resource. Instead, they offer you quiet nods, small gestures of gratitude that carry more sincerity than words ever could. Some attempt faint smiles, though the trench air often steals away their warmth before it fully forms. You continue serving, the ladle sinking into the pot again and again. Each movement feels like dipping into the same pool of muted perseverance that keeps the trench functioning day after day. The soldiers move through the kitchen space like a slow tide, arriving, receiving, retreating toward corners of the trench where they can sit and savour their lunch without any rush. You notice how they eat, slowly, methodically, their mouths moving in tired motions. For them, eating is less about pleasure and more about grounding themselves to something tangible. A moment of warmth is a moment of reprieve. The steam curls around their faces as they lift their tins, and for a brief stretch of time, each soldier exists inside a small bubble of quiet. A few speak softly to one another, exchanging murmurs that drift through the air without forming distinct words. Their conversations blur into the background, folding into the ambient hum of trench life, the shifting mud, the distant footsteps, the muffled clinks of tin against spoon. You return to the pot, stirring gently to keep the stew from settling into a single, cohesive mass. The surface wrinkles and smooths itself with each rotation, reflecting the firelight in muted waves. You lift the ladle once more and serve another pair of soldiers who have arrived late, their eyes carrying the unmistakable fog of sleepless hours. They nod in gratitude, then walk toward a narrow ledge where they sit without ceremony, as though sinking into mud is preferable to standing upright any longer. The fire crackles beneath the pot, sending up sparks that vanish before they reach the low ceiling of the trench. You add a piece of wood, watching the flames stretch upward in a brief display of enthusiasm before settling again. The smell of stew hangs in the air, soft, warm, uncomplicated, and blends with the earthy tones of the trench until everything feels part of the same muted colour palette. The soldiers begin finishing their meals, scraping the last remnants from their tins with small, deliberate motions. Some close their eyes as they take the final bites, savouring the warmth as though storing it within themselves for later. When they rise, they move slowly, as though stepping out of a dream. They offer quiet nods before drifting away again, returning to their posts with an exhaustion that clings to them like fog. As the last few linger, you feel the familiar weight of the afternoon settling over your shoulders. The pot grows lighter with each serving, the stew gradually vanishing into hungry hands and hollow tin cups. You stir what remains, letting the final ripples fade into stillness. The fire dims, drifting into a tired glow that mirrors the soldiers' faces. You stand quietly for a moment, listening to the soft sounds around you. Boots shifting, coats rustling, spoons tapping against metal. Everything feels muted, softened by the damp air and the slow rhythms of survival. The trench seems to hold its breath, waiting for the next movement in this endless procession of meals, footsteps, and moments of borrowed warmth. And as you lift the pot from the fire, setting it aside to clean later, you feel the day moving forward with the same quiet inevitability that guides every task here, carrying you along its gentle, mud-lined path. As their footsteps fade into the maze of trenches, you gather what remains of the meal, small tins, ladles, the stubborn residue clinging to the bottom of the pot. The duties of a trench cook extend beyond stirring pots and boiling water. There is the matter of transporting food to places where men cannot leave their posts. It is a task that demands patience, balance, and a willingness to negotiate with mud that behaves less like earth and more like a sentient entity with a mischievous agenda. You ladle the remaining stew into a portable container, an oversized tin pail with a lid that never quite fits, no matter how you angle it. The handle groans under the weight, a weary complaint that echoes your own fatigue. You attach a cloth around the lid to discourage curious rats and stray droplets, then lift the pail carefully. The stew inside shifts with a slow, deliberate swirl, making its presence known. The trench stretches before you like a labyrinth carved by exhaustion. Narrow walkways wind between sagging walls, their edges softened by layers of mud that seem to replenish themselves overnight. Wooden planks line the bottom of the path, though many have surrendered years ago and now tilt at uncertain angles. Each step demands attention. Each wobble reminds you that nothing here is truly stable. You begin your trek, boots sinking into the ground with muffled protests. The pail swings gently at your side, its weight pulling you slightly off balance. You adjust your grip and move forward with cautious determination. The stew inside sloshes in slow, rhythmic motions, as though testing how much movement it can tolerate before attempting an escape. The first plank you step on responds with a creak, a long, drawn-out complaint that suggests it has reached the end of its career and would appreciate immediate retirement. You tread lightly, shifting your weight as though approaching a skittish animal. The plank holds, though not convincingly. You continue onward. A gust of wind slips into the trench, carrying with it a faint whistle that rattles the loose edges of tarps strung above. Dirt drifts down in small avalanches, settling on your coat and on the lid of the pail. You brush it away with the back of your hand, though you know dust is as inevitable here as the mud beneath your feet. Voices echo from ahead, soft, steady, shaped by the monotony of men speaking, because silence feels heavier. They fade in and out as you walk, swallowed by corners and bends. The trench walls shift in colour, from deep brown to pale grey, depending on how the light filters down through gaps in the makeshift roofing. Every now and then, a sliver of sunlight breaks through, illuminating the path in fleeting patches that vanish almost as soon as they appear. You traverse a turn where the boards lean inward, forming a narrow passage that barely accommodates your shoulders. The pail brushes against the wall, leaving a streak of stew on the mud-caked surface. You sigh quietly, knowing the trench will simply absorb it without complaint. It absorbs everything: spilled broth, wayward boots, and the occasional piece of equipment someone sets down and immediately forgets. Further ahead, you encounter a section where the ground slopes downward, forming a shallow basin filled with a watery mixture that defiantly refuses to drain. You eye it with caution. Crossing this area always feels like stepping into a dream, where gravity is optional and dignity is negotiable. You test the first step, feeling the mud shift beneath your boot like something alive. The pail sways gently, prompting you to tighten your grip. You move slowly, inching across with delicate, deliberate balance. The mud rises nearly to your ankles, tugging at you with soft, insistent strength. Each step is an agreement between you and the earth. You will move forward if it releases you. It does grudgingly, with the unmistakable sound of suction. By the time you reach firmer ground, your boots are coated in a new layer of clay, their original colour increasingly theoretical. You continue through the trench, adjusting to the steady rhythm of your own footsteps. The walls around you seem to shift subtly, as though leaning in to watch your careful procession. Occasionally, a plank snaps under its own weight somewhere behind you, but the trench simply absorbs the sound, adding it to the long catalogue of daily noises. A soldier appears from around a corner, nodding at you as he passes. His uniform carries the faint scent of gun oil and stale sleep. He glances briefly at the pail, his eyes lighting with recognition. Food, even delivered late, is always a welcome sight. He gives you a faint, appreciative smile, one of the rare luxuries in this place, before disappearing into another corridor of mud and shadows. You press on, stepping over a wavering board that seems to tilt away from you out of spite. The pail shifts dangerously, and you steady it with both hands. The stew responds with a slow wave that presses against the lid, reminding you that balance is a fragile thing in the trenches. The walkway narrows further here, the walls closing in as though squeezing the space into something more intimate. A trickle of water runs down one side, creating a small stream that searches for an exit and never finds one. Ahead lies a sharp bend where the ground dips again, this time creating a small trench within the trench. You navigate it with the same patience you have developed for all such obstacles. Small steps, steady breathing, eyes fixed on the boards beneath your feet. The pail wobbles but stays upright. You pause briefly at a junction where three paths meet. One leads to the dugout where sentries keep watch. Another winds toward the communication trench. The third disappears into a dark corridor lined with sandbags patched and stitched countless times. You take the second path, following the faint trace of boot prints left by the men expecting the meal you carry. The trench becomes quieter here, the air heavier. The distant rumble of equipment blends with the wind's soft whistle. You hear no voices now, only the steady thrum of the earth shifting beneath its burdens. The pail feels heavier in your hand, not from weight, but from purpose. You continue forward. At last, a small cluster of soldiers comes into view. They stand beneath the partial cover of a sagging tarp, their eyes dull with fatigue and expectation. One looks up as you approach, straightening slightly. The others follow suit, each of them bearing the unmistakable posture of men who have not slept properly in years, but who still appreciate the small mercy of a warm meal. You set the pail on a crate, its metal thudding softly. The soldiers gather around, forming a quiet semicircle. You lift the lid, releasing a curl of steam that touches each face like a brief, gentle reassurance. You begin ladling the stew into their tins, one portion at a time. They accept it with small nods, their expressions softening in a way the trench seldom allows. As they eat, the trench feels momentarily softer, the air warmer, the walls less oppressive. You watch them in silence, taking in the slow, steady motions of spoons scraping against metal. The mud settles beneath your boots, content for now. When the last tin is filled and the pail emptied, you tie the lid shut and lift the container once more. The walk back will be just as slow, just as precarious, but the weight will be lighter. The trench waits, its maze stretching before you with all its familiar uncertainties. You take a breath, adjust your grip, and begin the return journey with the steady endurance that the day continues to ask from you. By the time you weave your way back through the narrow paths, the pail empty and the mud clinging to your boots with renewed commitment, the quiet around your cooking space has taken on a familiar heaviness. The boards beneath you shift ever so slightly, as though trying to settle into a more comfortable position, but uncertain whether comfort is allowed here. You set the pail beside the crate and take a long breath, letting the cold air fill your lungs. The remnants of steam still linger faintly in the corner of the kitchen, curling upward in slow spirals before surrendering to the grey sky. The fire, meanwhile, has diminished to a reluctant glow buried beneath a layer of ash. A few thin threads of smoke rise from it with the energy of someone trying to send a message but forgetting what it was halfway through. Keeping a fire alive in the trench is always an exercise in diplomacy. You crouch beside the pit, brushing away the loose ash to uncover whatever embers still survive. They blink up at you with dull orange eyes, their light flickering as if unsure whether you're a threat or a potential source of encouragement. You lean closer, feeling the faint warmth brush your fingertips. The air is damp, so damp in fact that it seems to hover in its own state of indecision. Moisture clings to your sleeves, your hair, the boards, the sandbags, even the metal tools nearby. It creeps into the fire pit with passive-aggressive persistence, snuffing out any spark that dares to appear too boldly. You select a few pieces of wood from the stack near the wall, examining each one with the weary discernment of someone trying to choose the least reluctant participant. The wood holds its own particular sorrow, heavy, swollen with moisture, and utterly unenthusiastic about fulfilling its primary function. You tap one piece lightly. It responds with a dull thud, the sound of something that knows it has no intention of catching fire, but is polite enough not to say so outright. You place the wood carefully around the embers anyway, arranging it in a way that suggests hope rather than confidence. You add a handful of dry scraps, thin slivers salvaged from crates that were fortunate enough to have spent part of their lives in drier climates. The scraps rustle as they fall, offering a brief moment of optimism. You strike a match. The flame flares for a heartbeat, casting a soft golden glow on your fingers. Then the damp air reaches out and dulls it, as though pinching it between two invisible, disapproving fingers. You strike another match, angling your body to shield it from the wind. The flame sputters, wavers, and then disappears with the meek resignation of something that has accepted its fate. A few soldiers pass nearby, glancing at your efforts with silent sympathy. They know all too well the challenge of coaxing life from fire under these conditions. One of them adjusts his helmet, mutters something under his breath that sounds vaguely encouraging, and keeps walking. The trench embraces him as he disappears down the winding corridor. You try again, this time cupping your hands more tightly around the flame. The match ignites, flickers wildly, then steadies. You lower it toward the dry scraps, holding your breath as the flame touches the wood's edge. For a moment, nothing happens. Then a small flicker appears, a hesitant hint of orange that wavers, as though trying to decide whether it feels comfortable committing to existence. You whisper something unintentionally encouraging, just a soft sound, barely more than a breath. The flame seems to accept the sentiment. It grows slightly, catching the edge of the scrap. Another piece ignites, then another. The tiny flames dance nervously, aware of their vulnerability, but trying to appear braver than they feel. The damp air watches, unimpressed. A sudden gust sweeps down the trench, swirling dust and moisture together in a single cold breath. The flames shrink in response, flickering desperately as the air tests their resolve. You lean closer, shielding them with your coat, your presence creating a small shelter where they can gather strength. Slowly, the flames stabilize. They begin to crawl across the scraps, their light warming the edges of the larger pieces of wood. The dampness fights back, hissing softly where flame meets moisture. But the fire persists, each flicker growing more confident, feeding on whatever dryness it can find within the stubborn wood. You sit back slightly, watching the fire with the cautious relief of someone witnessing a delicate truce being formed. The flames snap timidly at first, then stretch upward with more certainty, releasing soft crackles that sound strangely like sighs of relief. Heat radiates outward in uneven pulses, carrying with it the scent of smoke and wet earth. The larger pieces of wood begin to catch, albeit reluctantly. They glow at their edges, small veins of amber spreading across their surfaces. You can almost sense the wood weighing its options, deciding whether to cooperate. Eventually it gives in, not wholeheartedly, but enough to add to the growing warmth. You breathe out slowly, letting your shoulders loosen. The fire, though fragile, is alive again. You watch it settle, flames bending in slow fluid shapes. In the dim trench light, the glow reflects off the mud walls, warming them with a faint amber tint that softens their edges. A rat scurries by, pausing briefly near the fire pit. It observes the flames with an expression that suggests it, too, understands the significance of this small victory. Its whiskers twitch and then it disappears beneath a plank, leaving behind the faint sound of skittering paws. You adjust the wood, nudging it gently to give the flames more room to grow. The fire responds with a soft whoosh, its warmth brushing your face like an exhausted friend leaning into your shoulder. Its light flickers against your coat, catching strands of steam rising from the damp fabric. Another soldier approaches with a broken piece of crate. He offers it silently, placing it beside you before walking away. You nod to his retreating figure, accepting the contribution as part of the trench's unspoken understanding. Here, fire belongs to everyone. You break the crate piece into smaller fragments, adding them to the fire. They catch more easily than the soaked wood, sending sparks upward in tiny bursts of fleeting brightness. The flames feed eagerly, gaining strength. The fire grows steady, its glow no longer timid, but calm, anchored, deliberate. You sit back on your crate, letting the warmth seep into your hands. The wind continues to poke at the fire, testing its resilience with small cold fingers. But the flames hold now. They sway gently, without diminishing, their colours deepening into rich shades of orange and gold. For a while, you simply watch. There is something meditative in the slow crackle, the subtle stretching and collapsing of wood as it surrenders to heat. The trench feels quieter in this glow, the damp air softened by the fire's presence. Soldiers pass by from time to time, pausing to warm their hands before moving on, their faces momentarily illuminated with a touch of relief. The flames continue their patient dance, rising and falling with a rhythm that brings a rare sense of balance to this narrow world. You reach for the pot, already feeling the familiar pull of the next task, waiting for the fire's cooperation. But for now, the battle has been won, not through force but through persistence, patience, and the gentle art of coaxing warmth from unwilling wood in a place where even fire prefers to sleep. And as the glow settles into a steady heartbeat of light, you let the trench breathe around you, the air warming just enough to carry you into the next quiet movement of the day. The fire finally steadies into a quiet glow, a patient pulse of warmth that settles into the rhythm of the evening. Its heat softens the damp air just enough to feel like a small concession from the weather, a reluctant truce between flame and mist. You sit for a moment on the crate near the pit, letting the warmth curl around your hands. The light dances across the mud walls, washing them in muted gold that feels almost comforting in its simplicity. Above the trench, the sky shifts slowly, slipping from grey into a muted lavender that spreads across the horizon like a curtain drawn gently over the day. It is a colour that suggests calm, despite having no evidence to support it. The sort of sky that behaves as though the world is peaceful out of sheer politeness. The clouds stretch thinly above you, arranging themselves into soft shapes that pretend not to notice the war beneath them. The hour for supper approaches with a quiet inevitability. The trench grows still in that particular way that signals hunger has become the dominant thought among the men. Their footsteps slow, their conversations drift into quieter tones. Even the ever-present rustle of rats seems subdued, as though the small creatures understand that this is the part of the day when warmth matters most. You gather the ingredients left from earlier, vegetables that have softened with time, dried grains that clink faintly in their sacks, and whatever remnants can be coaxed into one more meal. The pot sits ready beside the fire, its metal warmed by the embers beneath it. You lift it, feeling the familiar pull of its weight, and set it carefully over the grate. The first splash of water settles into the pot, sending faint ripples outward. You add chopped pieces of carrot and onion, letting them fall into the water with dull thuds that echo softly against the trench walls. The grains follow, scattering briefly before sinking. You stir the mixture slowly, watching the motion spread through the water like the first stirrings of a quiet tide. The fire responds to your movements, crackling gently, as if offering encouragement. Its warmth rises in fragile waves, each one brushing your face with a softness that feels almost apologetic. The wood burns more willingly now, though it still carries the memory of its earlier reluctance, emitting occasional pops that seem to express its lingering resentment toward the damp air. Steam begins to rise from the pot in thin, hesitant threads. The scent of simmering vegetables fills the trench, subtle but welcome, a humble aroma that signals the day is smoothing itself toward evening. You observe the steam with the same quiet attention you give everything here, allowing its warmth to drift upward through the cool lavender light. A soldier approaches first, his footsteps barely disturbing the loose dirt on the ground. He pauses at the edge of your little kitchen, rubbing his hands together as though waking them from a long sleep. He nods to you with the muted gratitude that has become its own language in this place. You return the gesture and continue stirring. More soldiers arrive soon after, moving in slow, weary patterns that suggest they are being guided not by hunger alone, but by routine, an unbroken thread that leads them to the same place each evening. Their faces are dimly illuminated by the fire, the orange glow settling into the hollows beneath their eyes. They gather with quiet patience, forming a loose semicircle that blends seamlessly into the dimming trench. The pot bubbles softly as the vegetables soften, releasing small bursts of air that rise to the surface and pop without ceremony. You ladle a bit of the broth into a tin cup, testing its warmth. It is not rich, not complex, but it carries the simple comfort of something that has been heated, and that is enough. Supper in the trenches tastes more like endurance than flavour, more like the idea of food than food itself. You begin serving. One ladle at a time, the stew flows from pot to tin, its consistency somewhere between liquid and memory. Each soldier steps forward, accepting his portion with a subtle nod, the steam rising into the fading light like a small signal of survival. They cradle their tins with both hands, absorbing the warmth as though feeding something deeper than their bodies. A few find places to sit along the edges of the trench, settling into indentations carved by time and necessity. Others remain standing, eating with slow motions that reflect exhaustion rather than haste. The sound of spoons scraping gently against tin mingles with the crackle of the fire, forming a soft, rhythmic chorus that fills the narrow space. The sky overhead deepens into richer shades, the lavender sliding quietly into blue. It pretends calm with such dedication that you almost believe it. The clouds drift lazily, ignoring the mud, the smoke, and the weary men below. You lift your gaze for a brief moment, letting the illusion rest over you like a fragile blanket. One soldier, sitting near the wall, holds his tin close to his face, absorbing the steam with closed eyes. Another peers into his bowl with mild surprise, as though impressed that vegetables still exist in the world at all. A third offers a faint smile, small, almost imperceptible, but real. Supper may not be memorable, but its warmth softens the edges of the day. You remain near the fire, stirring the pot occasionally to keep the ingredients from settling into a single lump. The flames cast long shadows across the walls, their shapes shifting in gentle waves that mimic the movements of distant water. The wood crackles steadily now, no longer fighting the dampness, just quietly performing its part. Your coat absorbs the heat, warming your shoulders and back. For a moment you feel something like comfort settle around you, a temporary reprieve that floats between the smoke and the cooling air. The soldiers' quiet murmurs blend with the soft sighs of wind rolling through the trench, creating an atmosphere that feels strangely still, as if time has chosen to pause out of respect for the evening ritual. A few men come back for second helpings, offering you brief glances that hover near gratitude without fully reaching it. You fill their tins again, the ladle moving with a steady rhythm that has become instinctive. The pot gradually empties, each portion disappearing into hands eager for even the smallest warmth. As the last bowl is filled, the fire settles into its evening form, a deep, glowing ember bed that pulses gently like a heartbeat. The sky overhead darkens further, shifting from twilight into a soft, velvety dusk. The lavender has faded into memory, leaving behind a faint afterglow that lingers along the horizon. The soldiers finish their meals in quiet contemplation. Some chat softly, their voices low and steady. Others simply sit, staring into the fire's dance, as though searching for something within its glow. Their figures blend into the deepening shadows, their outlines softened by the encroaching night. You step away from the pot, setting the ladle aside. The steam rises into the darkening sky, curling upward before disappearing into the folds of cloud. The fire's glow plays across your hands, illuminating the thin sheen of moisture that always clings to your skin in this place. As the men drift away one by one, returning to their posts with slow, heavy steps, the trench settles into quieter tones. The last hints of supper remain only in the lingering warmth, the soft scent of cooked vegetables, and the gentle hum that follows any shared meal. The evening deepens, carrying the day into its quieter hours. The fire crackles softly behind you, its glow steady and subdued. The sky above pretends to offer calm, stretching wide and silent, holding its colours close as though protecting them from the world below. You gather your tools with quiet motions, the night gathering around you like a soft curtain. And in the fading light, beneath a sky that insists on behaving like peace is possible, you prepare yourself for whatever small tasks the evening will bring, carried gently along the slow current of trench life. As the last traces of supper warmth drift into the cooling night, You feel the fire settle into a quiet hush. The embers shrink into themselves, glowing like tired eyes ready to close. The air carries a faint sweetness from the cooked vegetables, mingled with smoke that has seeped into every fold of your coat. The trench murmurs softly in the background, shaped by distant footsteps and the low hum of men preparing for whatever the night demands of them. Your work does not end with feeding the soldiers. It continues in quieter, smaller acts, tasks that rarely receive thanks, but are essential all the same. The pots lined up near the fire, like weary veterans, wait for your attention. Their surfaces glisten with a mixture of soot, dried stew, and mud, as though each has collected its own layered memory of the day. You pull one closer, brushing the ash from its rim. The metal beneath feels rough, textured with countless scrapes and dents that give it a personality of its own. It is difficult to imagine what the pot might have looked like when it was new. Perhaps it once shone in a kitchen far from here, handled by someone who cared about flavour, presentation, or the simple joy of cooking. Now, it wears its age openly, its identity shaped by trenches, mud, and the repetitive rhythm of feeding exhausted men. The water barrel sits nearby, its surface rippling softly in the dim light. You dip a cloth into it, watching the fabric darken as the cold water soaks through. When you lift the cloth, droplets fall like small shimmering beads, disappearing into the mud without a sound. You begin scrubbing the pot, each stroke steady and unhurried. Mud clings to the cloth with the same determination it clings to everything else in this place. The residue on the pot resists removal at first, as though unwilling to let go of its claim. You press firmly, guiding the cloth along the pot's curves and edges, listening to the faint scrape of metal beneath your fingers. The sound is rhythmic, almost meditative, blending with the distant murmurs of the trench. The pot begins to yield gradually, not becoming clean. Such a thing is impossible here, but becoming less adorned with the day's burdens. Its surface shines faintly in patches, the metal revealing glimpses of itself beneath layers of soot. You take a small breath, letting the cool air settle in your chest, and continue the ritual. Another pot waits beside it, even more battered than the first. Its handle is bent from years of being carried through collapsing paths and dropped into mud. Its bottom bears scorch marks from fires that never quite behaved. The interior is coated with remnants of stew that have dried into a stubborn crust. You place it in front of you and begin again, dipping your cloth into the water and tracing slow circles across the metal. Tiny flecks of food loosen and drift into the water, forming a murky swirl at your feet. The cold numbs your hands slightly, but the repetitive motion brings a strange sense of calm. Cleaning these pots is not a battle, it is an acceptance. Nothing here becomes pristine, everything becomes slightly less worn, slightly less burdened. The fire's glow flickers gently beside you, reflecting off the damp surface of the pots. It stretches shadows across the trench wall, softening the rough edges of the sandbags and boards. The light is warm but subdued, as though conserving its strength for the darker hours ahead. A soldier walks by, offering a soft greeting. His voice carries the heaviness of the day, but his steps are steady. He glances at the pots with a faint, appreciative smile, perhaps understanding the importance of your task without needing to say so. His footsteps fade into the night, leaving behind a quiet that settles around you like a familiar cloak. You continue your work. The next pot is older still, its shape warped from years of use. The metal seems to sigh under your touch, as though relieved to have its surface tended to. You scrub gently at first, then more firmly, coaxing the mud and soot to release their hold. The water darkens further, swirling with traces of the day's meals, a ghostly reminder of the effort it took to feed men who seem perpetually hungry and perpetually exhausted. As the pot gradually reveals its contours, you feel a strange affection for it. These pots have accompanied you through countless mornings and evenings. Their steady presence, a quiet anchor in a world shaped by unpredictability. They do not complain, they simply bear what they must. The sky above deepens into a dark velvety blue. Stars begin to flicker faintly through breaks in the clouds, their light distant and cool. The night smells of earth and smoke, with an underlying hint of dampness that seeps into your sleeves and collar. A breeze drifts into the trench, brushing lightly against your face, carrying sounds from distant corners. Soft murmurs, the rustle of tarps, the shifting weight of sandbags. You lift the cleaned pot and set it aside. It gleams faintly in the firelight, proud in its worn, dented way. You reach for the next one. This one appears to have absorbed the entire day. A thick coat of soot on the outside, a stubborn ring on the inside that seems fused to the metal. It might indeed be older than you, shaped through wars and kitchens long forgotten. You run your fingers along its edge, feeling the texture of history etched into its surface. The cloth meets resistance as you begin scrubbing. The pot does not yield easily, insisting on holding on to remnants of meals that no longer matter. You persist anyway, moving slowly, letting each stroke wear away another layer of grime. You can almost imagine the pot sighing, its burden easing little by little. Rats scurry nearby, pausing occasionally to observe your work with their usual mix of curiosity and skepticism. One sits on its hind legs, whiskers twitching, as though critiquing your cleaning technique. You ignore the judgment. It is easier than explaining to a rat that pots do not clean themselves. The fire beside you shifts again, sending sparks upward in brief glowing arcs. The air grows cooler as the night deepens, wrapping around you with quiet firmness. You adjust your coat, pulling it closer to your neck, and continue the ritual. Scrub, rinse, scrape, rinse again. The process remains unchanged. The pots grow less coated, less burdened by the day's residue. They will never gleam or shine the way new cookware might, but they take on a cleaner shape, functional, dependable, ready for the next task. You place the final pot beside the others, aligning them neatly in a row. Their mismatched forms create an odd symmetry, a small chorus of metal that reflects the firelight in uneven patches. They sit patiently, their surfaces cooling in the night air, awaiting tomorrow's demands. Your hands ache faintly from the repetitive motion, but the ache feels honest. You rinse the cloth and drape it over the edge of the water barrel, watching it drip quietly. The night settles further around you, carrying the soft hum of distant voices and the occasional shuffle of boots. The trench seems calmer now, its edges softened by the glow of the fire and the steady rhythm of the tasks you've completed. You sit for a moment, letting the warmth of the fire seep into your palms. The pots rest nearby, their shapes familiar and reassuring. In the stillness, you sense the weight of the day loosening, making room for whatever the night might bring. And as the last ember flickers in the pit, casting a gentle, amber light across the worn metal, you feel the quiet continuation of your work. A slow, steady rhythm that carries you deeper into the night, guided by the simple, enduring rituals of the trench. The row of cleaned pots cools quietly beside you, their dented silhouettes catching the last hints of firelight. The night has deepened into something thicker, a shade of darkness that seems to settle not just around the trench but inside it, sinking into the boards, the sandbags, even the muddy air itself. You feel it wrap around your shoulders as you rise from your crate, stretching stiff hands that still remember the rhythm of scrubbing. A faint rustle moves through the trench, boots shifting, coats brushing against sandbags, voices muted into soft murmurs. The watchmen are taking their posts. They move with the slow certainty of men who have learned to make peace with exhaustion, shaping themselves into silhouettes against the dim sky. Their presence grows in patches along the trench line, forming a quiet chain of eyes trained on the dark horizon. The air grows cooler as the last warmth from the fire ebbs away. A thin sheet of mist begins to creep along the trench floor, mingling with shadows until it becomes hard to tell where one ends and the other begins. You know this hour well, the soft boundary between late and later, when even the mud seems to sigh beneath the weight of the night. A small request comes from one of the watchmen nearby, a gentle clearing of the throat, followed by a hopeful glance toward your kitchen space. Tea, the night companion, even if its flavour drifts somewhere between burnt metal and faint memories of the last beverage brewed in the pot. It is a comfort they cling to. And so you gather yourself, stepping toward the fire pit once more. The embers glow faintly beneath a thin layer of ash. You crouch beside them, brushing the top away until a few stubborn sparks wink up at you like old acquaintances. The wood you saved earlier rests against the trench wall, its pieces uneven and curled at the ends, as though each one spent the day contemplating whether burning is truly necessary. You select the least reluctant-looking pieces and place them carefully in the pit. The embers accept them with slow, smouldering breaths, encouraging small flames to grow at their edges. The fire slowly stretches awake again, flickering to life with a weary but determined glow. It casts long, thin shadows along the trench floor, where the mist swirls around them in loose, drifting coils. You fetch the smallest pot, the one traditionally used for tea, though tea is generous, and fill it with water from the barrel. The pot's surface is still cool from the wash, though the metal bears the faint scent of every liquid it has held in the past weeks. You place it over the freshly awakened fire, listening to the soft, metallic thud as it settles onto the grate. Shapes shift at the edge of your vision, watchmen pacing slowly, their outlines blurred by the dim glow and drifting mist. Their movements feel dreamlike, as though you are observing shadows reenacting a memory rather than men moving through the present moment. You add a pinch of tea leaves to the pot. They float for a moment, then sink, dissolving into the water with the soft grace of things that no longer resist their purpose. The fire warms the pot, the heat creeping along its sides in subtle waves. You wrap your coat tighter around yourself, feeling the night's chill trying to seep through the seams. The water begins to tremble gently. Not the confident boil of daytime, but a more hesitant shiver, as though unsure whether it should disturb the quiet stillness of the night. A watchman approaches, stopping just short of the firelight. His face is partially hidden beneath the shadows of his helmet. Only his eyes catch the glow, reflecting small flecks of amber. He gives a small nod, nothing urgent, nothing spoken, simply an acknowledgement that the ritual of late-night tea is underway. You nod back, returning to the pot. Steam begins to rise in delicate strands, weaving upward through the cold air. It carries a scent that might be tea, or might be something inherited from the stew cooked earlier. The pot remembers everything. It holds its history and flavour, the way the trench holds its past in layers of mud and soot. You stir the water with a spoon, watching the liquid darken into a muted brownish tint, the kind of colour only trench tea can achieve. The fire snaps softly, small sparks lifting into the air, only to vanish a moment later. The trench remains quiet aside from the distant shuffle of boots and the low hum of whispered conversations drifting in and out of earshot. The watchmen stand in their designated positions, blending into the walls as though carved from the mud itself. Their breaths form small, fleeting clouds in the cold air. You lift the pot, feeling its warmth through the handle, and pour the tea into a tin cup. The liquid sloshes gently, carrying with it a faint metallic aroma. The watchman steps forward, accepting the cup with both hands. His fingers curl around the metal instantly, as though trying to absorb whatever warmth they can. He murmurs a soft word of thanks, barely above a whisper, and steps back into the mist, taking a small island of firelight with him. Others gather soon after, arriving in ones and twos, their steps gentle, their expressions softened by fatigue. Each holds out a tin cup, and you fill them one by one. The tea pools inside each container, steaming faintly, its surface rippling with the glow of the fire. The men sip it slowly, knowing its flavour will never be pleasant, yet appreciating the warmth that radiates from it. You continue to pour. Each cup is a small offering, a brief reprieve from cold, from silence, from the long stretch of night that still lies ahead. The watchmen drink in silence, occasionally exchanging glances that carry more meaning than words could. In the trench, warmth is not measured by taste or luxury, but by presence. And the pot, stubborn and imperfect as it is, provides that warmth without fail. Once the line of watchmen thins, you return to the pot, stirring the small amount of tea still left at the bottom. It has darkened into something thick and slightly murky, as though the leaves have shared every last memory they held. You decide not to pour the remainder. Some parts of trench tea are best left to settle in peace. The fire burns lower now, settling into a comfortable pulse that illuminates your corner of the trench. The watchmen resume their positions, stepping back into the dim outlines of the night. Their cups sit warm in their hands, thin tendrils of steam rising from them, like small, fragile hopes drifting into the cold sky. You sit beside the fire again, feeling its warmth seep into your boots and sleeves. The night moves slowly, stretching itself across the trench in long, quiet breaths. The sky overhead has shifted into layers of deep blue, with a few faint stars peering through gaps in the clouds. Their light is weak, but it feels honest, steady, unshaken by the world below. The last ripples of tea settle in the pot, the steam fading into the darkness. You place the pot near the others, allowing it to cool beside its dented companions. Their metal surfaces reflect the fire in small uneven glimmers, forming a scattered constellation of light at your feet. You listen to the trench breathe, soft, rhythmic, alive. The night may be long, but warmth has found its place within it, carried in tin cups through the mist, held in tired hands until the last drop has faded. And as you sit with the fading firelight dancing quietly across the mud, the ritual of the evening settles around you, guiding you gently into the deep, slow hours that belong only to the watchful, the weary, and those who provide them with whatever comfort the night will allow. The last watchman drifts back toward his post, his cup still warm in his hands, leaving your little corner of the trench wrapped in a hush that feels unusually sincere. The fire has dimmed to a soft shimmer, its embers glowing like small sleepy stars nestled in the ash. You let your gaze rest on them for a moment, feeling their warmth reach you in faint, uneven waves. The night air gathers again in the spaces the fire leaves behind, cool and patient, brushing gently against your sleeves. You settle onto your crate, the wood creaking beneath you with a familiar complaint. The trench around you breathes in its slow, heavy way, shaping itself into a place that seems almost at rest, despite the distant rumble of forces far beyond your control. The mist has thickened, floating just above the ground like a pale, drifting veil. The watchmen's silhouettes fade in and out of it, moving with the slow grace of figures half-formed in memory. For a rare moment, the world finds a pocket of stillness. You take it in without expecting it to last. These small breaks appear without warning, brief pauses between the louder demands of the trench. They invite reflection, though never insist on it. You pull your coat tighter and allow your thoughts to unravel gently, carried along by the soft rhythm of the night. Your hands still smell faintly of tea leaves and smoke. The scents cling to your skin with a loyalty that borders on unnecessary devotion. You hold them close to your face and breathe them in, letting the warmth of the memory settle in your chest. The presence of these small tasks, stirring, boiling, cleaning, serving, has become its own kind of anchor in a place where time feels more like a suggestion than a structure. The quiet stretches around you. In the distance, something rumbles, low, long, and uncertain. It could be thunder, or artillery, or a massive crate falling somewhere in the supply trench. The trench does not care to distinguish. You listen without flinching, the sound passing through you like a misplaced storm cloud wandering across an indifferent sky. Your thoughts drift to home, not the vivid, bustling place it once was, but a softer, blurred version that exists only in the corners of your mind. You remember the kitchen where you learned to cook, long before this war reshaped your craft. The smells were richer there, the spices more forgiving, the utensils less dented. Even the pots seemed to carry themselves with a pride unknown to their trench-bound cousins. You recall the first time you burned a stew so thoroughly that the pot had to be carried outside for fresh air, an event that was not considered a crisis, but a lesson. Now, scorched pots are simply a sign of persistence. Your younger self would never have believed how easily your standards could shift. Here, edible has expanded into a wide, bending definition that includes anything warm, anything not actively trying to harm you, and anything the rats are willing to ignore. The distant rumble fades, replaced by the faint trickle of water somewhere down the trench. It drips rhythmically, forming a gentle cadence that seems to settle into your bones. You let your eyes wander over the mud walls, the ridges, the layers of damp earth, the small indentations left by hands and boots and tools. You trace them in your mind, following their patterns with soft detachment. A soldier walks past, his steps quiet, his posture folded inward. He nods to you on instinct, rather than recognition. You nod back. The exchange requires no meaning beyond simple acknowledgement. Two people existing in the same narrow world, sharing the same cold air. His silhouette dissolves into the mist, swallowed by the low light and the shadows that stretch along the trench. You lean forward slightly, resting your elbows on your knees. The embers cast a dim glow across your boots, highlighting the streaks of mud that have dried there in irregular shapes. You tap the toe of your boot lightly against the ground, watching a small puff of dust rise and vanish. The trench seems content to hold your weight, your breath, your thoughts, absorbing each one into its quiet, shifting memory. Another sound reaches you, softer this time. A distant metallic clatter, followed by a brief echo. It settles quickly, leaving the air even more still than before. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the quiet fill the space between your ribs. It is a fragile quiet, but it feels real enough to rest in. Your thoughts drift again, this time toward recipes you once knew by heart. Simple dishes, elaborate dishes, dishes that required ingredients you can barely name anymore. You imagine the colours, the aromas, the textures, all of them softened now by the haze of memory. You picture shelves stocked with spices, each jar bright and hopeful, waiting for someone to coax flavour into a meal. Here, spices are as mythical as dragons. You stir flavour into your food with imagination, more than ingredients. The fire cracks softly, one of the embers collapsing inward in a delicate sigh. You open your eyes and watch the glow settle into a new shape. The flames are too tired to protest the change. They adjust themselves silently. You think of the men who came for supper, how they cupped their tins close to their faces, as though shielding the warmth from the night. They did not ask for more than what you could offer. They never do. A warm meal in a cold trench becomes less of a luxury and more of a reminder. Someone here thought of them, prepared something for them, handed them a small reason to keep going. Your gaze drifts upward to the sky. The clouds have thinned slightly, revealing a handful of faint stars scattered across the dark. They look distant and indifferent, yet strangely comforting. Their light is so faint it barely reaches the trench, but it is enough to suggest that somewhere above the mud and mist, the world continues its slow, steady turning. You inhale deeply, filling your lungs with the night air. It tastes of smoke and dampness and something metallic. You exhale slowly, letting your breath mingle with the mist. The stillness remains, a rare offering in a place shaped by chaos. A quiet thought settles in your mind. How strange it is that the war has redefined not only taste, but also calm. You have come to accept this version of peace. A fire reduced to embers, a trench wrapped in mist. distant rumblings that pass without urgency, the soft scrape of boots moving through thick mud. These moments are neither joyful nor sorrowful. They simply are. You rest your hands on your thighs, feeling the tired ache in your fingers. They have stirred, lifted, scrubbed, carried, and soothed throughout the day. Now they lie still, warmed only by the fading glow of the fire. You rub them together gently, listening to the faint friction of skin against worn fabric. A breeze drifts along the trench, carrying with it the scent of wet earth. It wraps around you like a loosely woven blanket, neither warm nor cold, simply present. You let it pass over you, grateful for its softness. Somewhere far away, another distant thud reverberates across the landscape. The sound grows, then diminishes, like a misplaced thunderstorm, rolling across the edge of consciousness. You listen with calm detachment. The trench listens with you. Your thoughts settle into the quiet again, drifting in slow circles through memory, habit, and the muted rhythms of the night. The embers dim further, their light flickering like a heartbeat preparing for rest. And as you remain there, still breathing, thinking, you feel the trench gather its shadows around you, holding the moment gently, allowing you to sit in the rare stillness between shells, where reflection becomes as natural as stirring a pot or tending a fire. The night waits with you, unhurried, patient, steady. The embers dim into a softer glow, their red hearts pulsing faintly beneath a dusting of ash. You watch them as they settle deeper into themselves, shrinking into quiet shapes that echo the fire's final breaths. The night folds in around the trench, wrapping itself tightly along the walls, tucking into corners like a weary traveller seeking rest. The mist thins and thickens in uneven waves drifting past your boots, brushing against your coat, weaving through the narrow spaces with unhurried grace. Your eyes feel heavy, not with sudden fatigue, but with the slow accumulation of hours spent tending warmth, stirring pots and offering small moments of comfort to men who must remain awake while the world attempts to sleep. The stillness remains fragile, a rare guest in this place, and you move through it carefully, as though afraid that any sudden gesture might break the moment into pieces. You rise from your crate, stretching your back until your shoulders make a quiet, reluctant sound. The cool air presses gently against your face, carrying with it the faint scent of damp wood, earth, and tea steam that has lingered longer than you expected. You walk a few slow steps along the edge of your cooking space, feeling the ground yield softly beneath your boots. The mud tonight is unusually forgiving, settling into a cushion rather than a trap. It is a small kindness, the sort the trench offers only on nights when it remembers that humans live inside it. The watchmen's silhouettes stand at their posts, unmoving, except for the slight way their coats stir when the breeze winds through the trench. They seem carved into the walls, steady as the sandbags. Part of the landscape, none of them speak, none of them need to. The night has its own vocabulary, one spoken in breaths, distant echoes, and the quiet shifting of ground. You gather your coat more tightly around yourself and walk a few paces down the trench, searching for a patch of earth that feels somewhat familiar beneath the ever-changing mud. The ground darkens as you move away from the final glow of the fire, but you know the layout well enough by now that you do not need to see it clearly. You sense where the boards lie, where the softer spots wait, where the trench curves into a shallow dip that has become your makeshift bed on many nights. You reach that small hollow, a depression in the earth shaped partly by weather, partly by footsteps, and partly by your own weight over countless evenings. You kneel down first, pressing your hand into the mud. It has gathered enough moisture to feel cool, but not enough to seep through your coat immediately. It is the closest thing you have to a mattress, and tonight it seems willing to cooperate. You lower yourself carefully, finding a position that distributes the day's aches in a way that feels manageable. The mud shifts beneath you, moulding itself around your shape with an unexpected gentleness. You pull your collar up toward your chin and let your body settle, easing into the ground, letting it hold you. Above you, the sky stretches wide and dark, its few visible stars flickering with worn persistence. Clouds pass over them, like drifting thoughts that refuse to settle. Your breath slows. The night around you breathes in return. You listen to the faint rattle of the distant front line, a steady rhythm softened by distance and the walls of earth between you and it. It is a strange thing to find comfort in, yet it has become part of the nightly landscape, a sound that reassures simply by existing. The rumble rolls across the fields like a long, low lullaby, uneven in its timing, but familiar enough to soothe the edges of your mind. As you lie there, your thoughts unravel in slow, wandering lines. You think of the pots cooling beside the fire, their metal catching the last of the light like relics of a day that has already begun to fade. You think of the stew that warmed weary hands, the tea that cut through the chill, the moments of quiet that folded themselves around your tasks. You think of home without trying to picture it too clearly, just the sense of it, a place where kitchens are not carved from earth and where ingredients do not feel like negotiations. The trench hums softly under you, as though settling into its own version of rest. The boards creak occasionally, shifting their weight like old bones trying to find a comfortable position. A few grains of earth fall from the sandbags overhead, barely making a sound as they land. Somewhere far down the trench, someone clears their throat, the sound blending into the night without disturbing it. Your eyelids grow heavier, lowering slowly as the world narrows into gentler shapes. The mist curls along the edge of your coat, touching your sleeves like a quiet gesture meant only for you. You let your head sink deeper into the crook of your arm, feeling the mud give just enough to cradle your weight. The distant front line continues its uneven murmur. You feel it rather than hear it, a vibration that travels through the ground, a faint reminder that even when the world tries to sleep, parts of it refuse to obey. Yet the sound does not disturb you. Instead, it lulls you further, becoming the steady rhythm beneath your drifting thoughts. Your breathing softens. Each inhale draws in the scent of earth and smoke. Each exhale releases the remnants of the day's weight. You think of recipes again, the way your mind wanders toward them when it grows quiet. They appear as fragments, the smell of bread baking, the sound of a knife slicing through ripe vegetables, the warmth of a kitchen that does not depend on fire, coaxed from stubborn wood. You do not hold on to these memories tightly. You let them drift past you like small lanterns floating on water, glowing briefly before fading into the dark. Somewhere near your boots, a rat scurries past, its tiny feet tapping lightly against the ground. It pauses for a moment, perhaps to verify that you're simply resting and not attempting to reclaim chosen route, then continues its journey with practiced confidence. You feel no urge to move. The rat belongs to this hour just as much as you do. The sky darkens further, the clouds thickening as though preparing to blanket the night. The stars recede behind them, becoming faint whispers of light. The trench grows dimmer, softer, its edges smoothing into shapes that feel dreamlike. You shift slightly in your bed of earth, the mud adjusting with you, holding you in place with its cool, steady grip. Your muscles loosen as they yield to the softness beneath you. Your mind quiets, drifting between wakefulness and something deeper, something slower. The distant rumble fades into a gentle vibration. The breaths of the watchmen blend with the wind. The fire's last glow flickers, then dims completely. The trench becomes a cradle of shadows, holding its inhabitants in a silence that feels suspended. Your thoughts drift freely now, no longer tied to tasks or necessities. You feel yourself floating in the slow current of the night, your body sinking gently, your mind softening at its edges. The world keeps waking up in shifting sounds and distant echoes, but you drift anyway, slipping into rest like a small boat settling into calm water. The mud beneath you for once feels kind. It holds you without complaint, steady and cool, soft enough to ease the ache in your bones. Your breaths deepen, your pulse slows, your eyes close fully. The last thing you feel is the quiet pull of sleep, wrapping itself around you, patient and complete, while the world hums softly in the background, still turning, still stirring, still restless. You drift towards sleep in a trench that refuses to ever be truly still, carried gently by the faint, familiar rattle of a distant front line, pretending, just for a moment, to be a lullaby. And that brings us to the end of tonight's story. Feel free to like, subscribe, or leave a comment with another forgotten corner of history you'd like explored next. If you'd like early access to more of these quiet descents into forgotten history, ad-free audio of the episodes, or just want to support the show, there's a link to the Patreon in the description. If you're listening on a podcast app, a rating or review helps more people find their way to these stories. And special thanks to the supporters who make this show possible, including our chroniclers, Andrew S., Rich Davis, and Leslie Schofield. Sleep well.